welcome to another episode of Cybersecurity Weekly. I'm your host, Fred Cobb, Executive Vice President and CSW at InfoSystems. With me today, Senior Cyber Strategist Rob Ashcraft. Rob, how you doing?
Hey, I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. And by the way, Rob works with me at InfoSystems, does a ton of work with various customers in the region in regards to various cybersecurity projects, initiatives. So it's great to have Rob today. And we're just going to get right into it. So if you recall, those of you who've been keeping up with the podcast series, in mixing in with some of our other content, we've been doing a series on the Center for Internet Security Critical Security Controls. And if you've been keeping up or are aware of those controls, you know that we really focus on the top 20 controls. And to date, we've covered the first three, which I'm going to quiz you. What was the first one? Anyone? Think about it. Oh, that's right. You can't hear me. So first one is inventory of authorized and unauthorized devices. So we're talking about hardware assets. Number two, inventory of unauthorized and authorized software, or authorized and unauthorized, depending on how you want to say that. And also the third one, continuous vulnerability management. So we've covered those three topics. And we want to keep the process going with covering those because they're very important for working into your cyber program, working into your overall development of your processes, your policies, your procedures. So Rob, what's number 4?
So the number 4 control, as of version 7 anyways, this used to be number 5, but it is now CIS control number 4, is the controlled use of privileges.
Okay, that's exactly right. So we're going to look at administrative privileges. And I will tell you, when we're out there and we're doing rapid response, or we get in the middle of after the fact situations where an environment has been compromised, and certainly, Rob, you can attest to this, what we often see is a liberal usage of administrative accounts in an environment. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, certainly. As we're doing assessments and looking into multiple or dozens and dozens of computing environments, we just see, really unneeded or unnecessary administrative privileges. And we know this is a common vulnerability used to propagate attacks throughout an organization's computing environment. So it's certainly one that needs to be looked at, mitigated, and it's in the top 6, which are the most essential critical controls of the CSC20. So it's very important.
Absolutely. And if you think about it, why does that happen, or what's the risk there?
We'll be back with the Cybersecurity Weekly podcast after we pause for this special message. Security analysts believe cyber attacks will continue to escalate throughout 2020 and are recommending that every company, regardless of industry or size, place immediate focus on cybersecurity training and the tools that will protect you from these attacks. Did you know that you can book a cybersecurity assessment right now with Fred Cobb's team of cybersecurity engineers at InfoSystems? They will help you discover exactly where you are most vulnerable to a cyber attack and make recommendations on how to strengthen your defense in those areas. This is urgent. It's an issue that affects everyone in our community. Visit the InfoSystems website at www.infosystems.biz to request your cybersecurity assessment. Now back to the podcast.
Well, let's talk about the risk for just a moment. So if you think about the goal of an attacker, someone out there, they're trying to get access into customers' network, trying to get access into your environment, the folks that are listening to this podcast now. One of the key things is if I can get administrative access, in other words, if I can compromise an account, it really opens the door to allow me to pivot into other systems, to pivot into other areas of the network. And as an attacker, that's one of my main goals. As a ethical hacker, let's say you hire a company to do a pen test, a penetration test. Typically, that's what they're looking for. They're either exploiting a known vulnerability, or they're probing to see how can I gain administrative access on this network. Is that a fair statement?
Oh, most definitely. And that's some of the common things we think about access control. And even looking at the bigger picture, it's not just the attack on that certain area or machine, but it certainly can affect the whole computing environment as access control is too wide open. It allows an attacker to basically cascade up through the architecture um, and begin attacking multiple systems, or even get into, God forbid, the domain controller. So there's a lot of risk involved here, and essentially, access control or controlled access ensures that the policies that the organization has and their processes and even the technology is in place to protect not only the sensitive data but the movement of nefarious activity within the computing environment.
Sure. And if you think about, again, getting back to how systems are compromised, I've heard the argument, well, it's just a workstation. What's wrong with having or allowing someone to be the local administrator on their box? Again, we get back to this pivoting concept where if I can gain access into a single system, that becomes my home base if I'm an attacker. And I can sit out there depending on what type of network detection capabilities this particular environment has. I could sit out there for days, weeks, months, just patiently probing, seeing what I can do, seeing how I can elevate my privileges in other areas on other systems. So it really has to be all encompassing when you think about controlling administrative privileges. And I don't know, Rob, I mean, you see this a lot where the average user has administrative privileges on their workstation. Can you think of why that's commonplace? Is there any particular reason why people tend to do that? Is it just being lazy? Is it not thinking?
Well, I think there's a certain amount of cyber procrastination that happens, but that's another topic for another day. But I do agree that I think you touched on it really has to do with operational concepts of how the organization should be able to be nimble, maybe move quickly. Hey, if I need this, I need it right now. And I think the organization as a whole, this has probably been talked about before, but it's worth saying again, the culture of the organization needs to change, where security is not just an IT policy or an IT responsibility, but it's really the responsibility of the entire organization, right down to the every end user. And so if there's a little more inconvenience at times when it comes to loading a new program or making changes on their system, it's worth to endure that for the security that it adds because of the vulnerabilities and, or I should say, the large threat landscape. The culture has to change, and each user has to have more responsibility. Part of that is they lose some privileges in terms of administration to their system and access to the entire computing environment.
No, that's perfect, and it is sort of an ease of use thing, and that's where I've seen it happen a lot. Is where we got a limited number of folks in the IT department, and every one time someone needs something installed, it requires elevated privileges to write information to the registry and then get the files out in the proper directory. So a lot of times the IT department will just say, I'm just going to make you a local admin so I don't have to bother with this. Well, you've created a potential Pandora's box by doing that. So it's very important for those IT administrators out there listening. I know it's a cultural thing, as Rob mentioned. Sometimes you have to, go against the grain, against the what's easy, and really make those hard decisions. And one of the other things I want to touch on here while we're on this topic is even those privileged administrators. In other words, let's say you've got an IT staff of 2 or 10 or 20, depending on the size of the organization. Even those 2 or 10 or 20 folks that may have an account that has elevated privileges that allow them to do things to do the job of IT management, they shouldn't be using that account in their everyday, reading of email. You want to comment on that just a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. And so there's also another layer here, which is called using separate administrative accounts. So even those who have their IT and responsible for administrative activities within the computing environment on local machines, even in that, we highly recommend that they use a separate user account for just administrative activities. meaning the regular user account that they log in does not have administrative privileges, but there's a separate account just for that, just for those activities, and then it's logged out and back into your normal user account. And again, it's there's always that balance of, hey, are we locking down user privileges, and that's so much that we're choking the life out of operations? But there are reasonable measures that need to be taken. That's certainly one of them. It doesn't take that long to log out an account and log into another account. We also recommend that to use multi-factor authentication with those administrative accounts. Again, that so if a password is compromised, the second layer of authentication prohibits a hacker or would-be hacker to go any further. So these are all important measures. They don't take that much more time, but they do take a little more time. Again, it gets into that culture change of, hey, we've got to take a few extra steps. It's just the way it is. The operations and processes we used 10 years ago are not going to work today. It just doesn't. It's not a matter of would we ever be attacked. It's happening every day, all the time. And so you just have to use some best practices and reasonable measures.
Yeah, there's an acronym that our listeners may be familiar with, many of them, but the principle of least privilege. And that gets back to using an account that will allow you to get the job done at that particular time and elevate your privileges if you're an administrative user when you need to do so. So applying the principle of least privilege when you're doing things will really help your overall cybersecurity posture. And also using things like role-based administrative control. A lot of applications have RBAC capability, so you can group your users that need different tiers of privileges into various roles. So that's a good concept as well. But again, just to kind of sum it up, it can be a cultural shift, but it's something that's absolutely necessary that you get control of how many administrative accounts you have active in the organization, because it can definitely lead to a compromise of your environment through one of those accounts.
Yeah, I think it really involves the organization on a high level, and maybe the key stakeholders have to sit down and look at the users and put those using something like a role-based access control, and really decide who has access to what do they need. Again, you mentioned the principle of least privilege, giving user accounts or privileges to what's essential for them to perform their role within the company. So an example would be if my purpose was I'm doing backups for the company, then I don't need to install software. So I have even on an IT level, I've got the rights to run backups or run backup related applications. But any other privileges like installing new software are blocked. And that sounds very granular, and it can be depending on the size of the organization. But that's just an example of using principle of least privilege.
Well, that's perfect. That's perfect. Great example. So, Rob, we're going to wrap it up for today. We really appreciate you hanging out with us. I'm going to have you on the show on a very regular basis. And we're going to close this particular podcast topic today. In future podcasts, we're going to be continuing down the CSC20 controls path, talking about 5 through 20 we've got left to do. So we've got a ways to go with all that. Also, we're going to create a little mini series on various things you can do as a cybersecurity professional, kind of breaking down what does it mean to be a cybersecurity specialist, all the different ways you can develop your career or do career change, whatever you want to do. So I'm excited about talking about those topics. So let's close it out. Rob, thanks again. And everybody, appreciate you tuning in, and we'll see you on the next episode. Thank you.
Thanks very much.